representatives of the administration in. When everyone's ready, our meeting will resume.
Okay,
let's resume the meeting. FS, please take us through the paper. And then the floor will be open to members for questions. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to consult the FA panel on the upcoming budget 2013-14. Now, the budget plans for the revenue and expenditure of the coming year, and therefore these two areas have much to do with the economic outlook for the coming year. In the last item, I've already introduced the relevant economic outlook, and members have already expressed their views, and I shall not repeat. Now, for the third quarter, the Hong Kong's economy have recorded moderate growth. But in terms of Hong Kong as an open and externally oriented economy, we are subject to external headwinds. So the coming year will be a challenging year.
Given this macro environment, when I write out the next budget, of course, I have to make budgetary preparation for the measures for the CE's policy initiatives in the PA. Over and above that, I would also have to analyze how Hong Kong can further give play and also develop our potential so that we can promote the further growth of the economy. At the same time, I also have to be prudent and cautious and also cut our clothes according to the cloth and make the best use of resources, and also to help those needy in the community to improve their livelihood. I welcome members' views. So there will be more food for thought for the budget. The policy address will be announced in mid-January instead of October, and the budget will be announced at the end of February. In order to have better coordination between policy formulation and budgeting, in mid-October, the administration has already started a parallel consultation on the PA and the budget. We have already conducted over 30 such consultation meetings, and the CE and myself will carefully consider views we have gathered throughout the consultation process. Before I listen to members, I would ask the PS to introduce to us the background to the next budget. PS? Thank you, Chairman. The PowerPoint is actually in 4 parts. The economy, expenditure, revenue, and fiscal reserves. Since the economy itself has been discussed already, so I will just flip through it. Let us go to expenditure directly. In this chart, we'd like to let you know the total expenditure since 1997-98. And the increase so far has been 102.6%. That is from 190 billion in 97-98 to 393.7 billion in 2012-13. That is our yearly expenditure. In the same period, the GDP has grown by 45.9%. This chart also shows the categories of expenditure. Those in gray have to do with recurrent expenditure. In the past 15 years, the increase is 77%. 77%. And capital works expenditure increase is 142.3%. And also from this slide, you can see that in the past 5 years, the increase in expenditure has been very easy to see. In the past 5 years, the overall government expenditure has been 67.7%. At the same time, economic growth was by 21.2%. We always say that recurrent expenditure can go up but not come down. So we think that we should carefully control the growth in expenditure. In this chart, we tell you the more on the part of recurrent expenditure. As I said, in the past 15 years, recurrent expenditure has gone up by 77%. If we look at the policy areas to do an analysis, you will see that at the bottom of these bars, you can see education. The education is by about 60%, and then health, an increase of 71.8%, social welfare, 120.5%. This will include CSSA and also public security payments. And in this chart, you will see that from 2002-03 to 2012-13, the increase is more obvious. In the past 5 years, recurrent expenditure was by 32.5%. And here, we like to introduce the recurrent expenditure for 2012-13. This is just for 1 year. And you can see that this will take up 67.1% of total government expenditure, which is $393.7 billion. In other words, $264.3 billion would belong to recurrent expenditure. Let us look at the biggest chunk. The 4 biggest chunks are education, which is about $60 billion or 22.6% of recurrent expenditure. And then health, and then those two in orange and yellow, they are social welfare. Now, first of all, CSSA and social security assistance, and the smaller sector is social welfare and welfare. But the two taken together will cost $44 billion in 2012-13. This is the original estimate. This has not taken into account the impact of the OALA, which will add $6.2 billion to this sector. Apart from recurrent expenditure, the other biggest chunk is on capital works. From this chart, you can see that our expenditure on capital works has been on a sustained increase trend. In 1997-98, the yearly expenditure on capital works was about $29 billion. But by 2009, it rose to over $45 billion. And then in 2012-13, we expect that this would include minor works as well. It will reach $62.3 billion. In the past, the Finance Committee has already vetted and approved many Category A projects, which are now already underway. There are 700 such Grade A or Category A capital works projects, which will incur extra expenditure in the next few years. Therefore, we expect that capital works expenditure will enter a peak in the next few years. The blue part in this chart shows outstanding expenditure for capital works. That is at July 2012, and that stands at $368.5 billion. Let us now look at revenue. This chart tells us the increase in total government revenue in the past 15 years. The increase is by 38.3%, said the speaker. Well, of course, revenue fluctuated throughout these 15 years. Let us look at the operating revenue at the bottom of the bars. And in terms of salaries tax, it went up by 63.6%. Normally speaking, salaries tax would be the second or third largest income source for government, and it is a stable source. And then profits tax. It is the biggest source of operating revenue. But then you can see from this chart that profits tax would be affected by the economy a lot, and the fluctuations can be big. In the last 15 years, when the amount was small, it was at 37 billion, but when the income was good, it could be as high as $110 billion. Next, investment income. The revenue would depend on the capital that can be invested and also the investment return. Before 2007, we were worried that the investment income would not be stable. But starting from the 1st of April 2007, we put in a new arrangement, and that is we reached an agreement with the foreign exchange fund, and that is we would make use of the average income of the fund for the past 6 years as the income of the administration, and therefore in any year the investment income would not be less than the income of foreign exchange bonds for the last 3 years. And after that, the average income would be at about $35 billion or more every year. Then we have stamp duties. From this chart, you can see that it can vary quite a lot. When we did not have a lot of income, it could be as little as 7.5 billion, or it could be as high as $50 billion. And now let us look at the non-operating revenue. Most importantly, it is the land premium in blue. Again, it can fluctuate quite a lot. In 2002-2003, it was just 5.4 billion, and then when it was a main source of income, it could be $84 billion. Next, let us look at revenue for 2012-13. There are 5 major revenue incomes. Profits tax, the biggest chunk, and then salaries tax, and then stamp duties, standing at about 10%, then investment income, and then land premium. These are all our major sources of revenue. Let us take a look at profits tax and salaries tax. Let us look at the assessment year 2010-11. If we look at all registered corporations in Hong Kong, about 12% of them have to pay corporate profits tax. Only 12% had to pay corporate profits tax. This is the blue part in the pie chart on the left, and we are talking about 91,000 companies only. How much do they pay? Let us look at the chart on the right, and you will see 89,600 corporations, and they were responsible for 31% of all corporate profits tax. And those which paid a lot of profits tax, the number of companies stood at 1,400, and they were responsible for 70% or 69% of the corporate profits tax. Let us look at the distribution in a more concrete way. Let us look at the net assessable profits, which is in the first column. From $1 to $500,000, which is the net assessable profits, we have 52,600 such corporations, and the average tax paid by them were $24,000 odd. And let us go to the bottom of this chart. In other words, the net assessable profits, which would be between 50 million to 100 million, there are only 700 such registered corporations. And then those with net assessable profits over $100 million, again, there are 700 such corporations. This is what I meant by the 1,400 companies which were responsible for paying 69% of all corporate profits tax. I'd also like to mention that profits tax took up 25% of all government revenue. In other words, we depend on profits tax for a quarter of revenue for the government.
Sorry. Next, salaries tax. Based on the year of assessment 2010-11, we can do an analysis. We have 3.5 million working population, around 40%, and that's 43%, paid salaries tax. That's 1.5 million. And out of the 1.5 million who paid salaries tax, the top 200,000 people paid 81% of the salaries tax, whilst the remaining people paid 19% of the salaries tax. So you can see from the details here, for the 1.5 million who pay salaries tax, on average the tax rate is 8.1%, and the average tax amount was around $36,000. And this table doesn't show you the year of assessment of 2012-13 and the adjustment of the basic tax allowances. This is just a situation for 2010-11. And finally, a few words on fiscal reserves. Only cash inflow and outflow will be taken into account, and the fiscal reserves is the total of the balances. And the general revenue account and the aid funds established for specific purposes are included under fiscal reserves as shown in this slide. The fiscal reserves balance as at 31st of March 2012 is $669.88 million, and that's the reserve or the cash that the government has. But in fact, there are also commitments and liabilities that have yet taken into account. As said just now, in the coming years, we need to reserve $368.5 billion for outstanding commitments on capital works. This has not been included in the fiscal reserves, and there is the unfunded pension liabilities. And as at the 31st of March 2011, the unfunded pension liabilities stood at $553.8 billion, and the expenditure will cover a number of years. As for the guarantees given, for example, some special guarantee scheme for SMEs, or the guarantee for Ocean Park commercial operation, and the guarantee under the ECIC, altogether they added up to $90-odd billion. Functions of the fiscal reserves. Now, it supports day-to-day operational needs. It is the cash in our hands. So basically, it has to support our day-to-day operational needs, and we also make investments, and investment income will be generated. And these two are more familiar to you. And we also need the fiscal reserve to strengthen the stability of Hong Kong dollars. And during economic downturn, the fiscal reserves will act as the fiscal cushion. You may recall that between 1998-99 to 03-04, there were 5 years of fiscal deficits, and fiscal reserves equivalent to 15 months of government expenditure was used, and the fiscal reserve declined from 28 months of government expenditure to 13 months in 2004. And we also had to cope with changes from an aging population. In short, we want to emphasize that over the years, the government expenditure has exceeded the GDP growth, and there is a need to prudently control the expenditure. And there are also a couple of key areas where we have seen growth, and our tax base has remained narrow, and we need to be cautious about the drop in revenue, and we need to spend within our means. Our fiscal reserves is of paramount importance in stabilizing Hong Kong dollar strength. So we need to abide by fiscal prudence, and we must spend within our means. 7 or 8 members would like to speak. Ronnie Tong, Chan Kin Paul, Sin Chung Kai, etc. Any other members? Chen Kam Lam. 4 minutes each, Mr. Ronnie Tong. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask FS, since reunification, almost every year, the Financial Secretary would underestimate the revenue for the year, including the incumbent FS. Now, in slide 12, increase in stamp duties 27.2%, land premium minus 4%. But this is the figure based on the comparison with the baseline in 1997-98, and comparing to 07-08, in fact, it has dropped. As far as stamp duties are concerned, as for land premium, it remained more or less the same. As for the measures rolled out to combat property speculation, including the SSD, will there be a decrease in the stamp duties collected, and what would be the impact? And would it be less than the original estimate? And what would be the impact? I'd like the FS to explain. That's the first question. Second question. This year, similar to the past, there would be the joint public consultation on the budget and the policy address. So it actually directly compresses the time allowed for members to ask questions. We only have 1 hour to meet with you, FS. That's the case for Civic Party. Well, basically, we'll place our focus on policies, and we therefore would have limited time in speaking on the budget. So as the new term of government comes into office, I wonder if this is the appropriate way of handling the consultation. And will there be another round of consultation so that different political parties would have a known chance to meet with you and talk about the budget? FS. First question. Why is the administration always wide off the mark when it comes to estimates? That's the first question. not only inaccurate estimations. FS, I'd like to talk about revenue coming from land premium and stamp duties for this year. Okay, you're running short of time. Please allow FS to answer. Estimation is never an accurate science. The difference may have to do with a number of factors. For example, when we draft the budget in terms of revenues, we base our estimation or assessment on the data collected then. For example, for stamp duties, revenue from land premium, and even tax revenues, they're subject to the external environment, so it's hard to gauge. As for the stamp duties, whether under the new measures there would be an increase, I'm asking about a possible decrease. I hope that it will come down to zero, because with these measures, the activities would be curbed. Mr. Tong, please refrain from having a dialogue. But he hasn't answered the crux of the question. So what to do, Mr. Chan Kin-po? Now, profits tax and salaries tax, they account for 40% of the total revenue. For slides 15 and 17, you have listed out in table form the profits tax and the salaries tax. Have you any figures on the changes over the past 10 or 15 years, and what will the administration do about it? For example, if the focus is on highly profitable corporations, then is it appropriate? Because I don't have the figures here. As for fiscal reserves, I have heard in the past that members have been mistaken. That is, they thought that there were trillions of dollars on our reserves, but in fact there is just $669 billion. And in terms of cash flow, I wonder if we are we're spending too much. Now, third question, I recall that in the past for unfunded pension liabilities, the figure was just $400 billion. Why has it now jumped to over $500 billion? Can you give us some figures on the possible causes, and what do you think? Will it go further up in the future? I'll defer to PS to answer the few questions. Now, for the tax base of salary tax and profits tax, whether the base has been narrowed. In fact, over the past 10 years, for corporations paying profits tax, they accounted for about 14% of the total number of registered corporations. And that's the case in the figure was 12% in 2010-11, and in 0203 or 0304 the figure was 14%. That's the case for profits tax. Salaries tax, around 85,000 in 2010-11 had to pay salaries tax. In 0203, at that time, 1.2 million paid salaries tax, accounting for 36% of the total working population. Now, for 2010-11, it's 44%. In 07-08, 1.4 million roughly paid salaries tax, accounting for 41% of the working population at the time. Now, for public officers or civil servants, on the calculation of pension liabilities, the administration does from time to time commission actuaries to make adjustments. In terms of number of prospective pensioners, the number is actually fixed. It's a closed system. Each year when we prepare the actuarial adjustments, we come up with different estimates or projections. For example, the future price fluctuations or adjustments, and the assumption on the cash payment would also be adjusted accordingly. And that accounts for the change. Next, Mr. Sin Chung Kai. Now, if according to PS, there's a fiscal cliff happening in Hong Kong, as in slide 19, then this is just one other liability that the Hong Kong government has to shoulder. But it doesn't mean that this is a one-off payment. We can pay it by our annual revenue. I'd like to ask about the profits tax.
Page 14. 88% of the companies do not have to pay profits tax. There are different reasons. One, they did not make any money. Two, some companies were not in operation. But the focus is not on the right, but on the left, those companies in gray. Some companies would be paying taxes by filling out forms, and they must have done so in an honest manner, or else they would have cheated the government, and that's criminal. I'd like to ask you how many of these companies are actually shell companies which are set up only to buy property, and others they set up companies for legally avoiding tax, that is tax avoidance vehicles. Have you looked at these 80,000? I think there are almost 80,000 such companies which do not have to pay profits tax. Did you do any sample checking in order to try to know why there are so many companies but they do not have to pay profits tax? Is it that all of them did not make a profit? Could you try to increase your revenue from this sector? Secretary, thank you. We are not going to fall over a fiscal cliff because, as you said, this member, we did not have to make the payment at one go. The pensions, of course, would incur expenditure every year, but we have a system to make the payments. As for infrastructure, yes, there will be yearly expenditure, but as you know, it is already standing at a high level. And in the next few years, the capital works expenditure will stand at about 60 to 70% billion, which is a big number. And you asked a particular question on profits tax. We do not have the breakdown. However, the 88% of companies which did not have to pay profits tax, there are about 700,000 to 800,000 such companies, not 80,000. Because in Hong Kong, over 90% of our companies are SMEs. Many SMEs only have a few people in them, and their revenue does not reach the tax-paying threshold. And as you said, some of them are shell companies. We would not rule that out, but we do not have any statistics in this regard. Chairman, of course I understand. When you showed another slide, the one on page 19, I was just wondering whether you are telling the public that our reserves cannot allow us to pay all our debts. But let me follow up on the original question. Well, maybe I read it wrongly. There are 700,000 to 800,000 companies which have been set up, but they did not have to pay profits tax. Why is that so? I think that warrants more detailed study. Are there many legal channels for them to avoid paying tax? Sorry, your time is up. Mr. Lee Cheuk-yen. Thank you, Chair. Hong Kong definitely does not have a fiscal cliff, but many people in Hong Kong are living near a poverty cliff. How can we save them from falling over the cliff? Mainly, we need the administration to show commitment in education, medical services, and social welfare. That definitely goes a long way to redistribute resources and so can narrow the wealth gap. My question for you is, you have been the FS for many years. In the past, I said that you are a stooge, that you only dished out one-time goodies and did not pay commitment in recurrent expenditure. And we criticized you for being overcautious and over-conservative, so that in a way you have become cruel. These charts are not going to help us because you compare with the past. The important thing is for us to compare ourselves with international standards. And our welfare spending is only 21% of GDP. And if you look at your operating revenue, that is more than your recurrent expenditure. Why do you want to be so stringent with recurrent expenditure? Because it will cause the Hong Kong situation to worsen. Let me give you an example. Certainly, we believe we should provide the OALA to more elderly people. Your calculation is $6 billion, but I think you should commit more. Even if it is $6 billion, it would just mean that the social security payment would increase by over 20%. However, if the chart itself, the pie is not made larger, that means there would be less expenditure in other aspects of welfare. That is why we want you to expand the pie and give a bigger sector to the welfare sector. I'd like to know whether you would go back to your old way, and that is to do a midterm forecast, or instead you will still be conservative, but then you are a new term of government and you have a new CE. Our Labour Party will ask you that over and above your midterm review, there would be $20 billion more for education, medical, and social welfare services. Secretary, do you have any new thinking in this regard? Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. I thank Mr. Lee Cheuk-yan for his reminders all these years. As the FS, if you say I am conservative, I will regard that as a compliment. Thank you. In terms of education, medical, and social welfare, those take up 60% of our recurrent expenditure. And as you could see from the slides, there have been market growth. And if our recurrent expenditure has to expand further, we must be prudent about it, because it will have a big impact on our finances. If the pie has to be made bigger, it means expenditure is bigger. However, we have to be mindful about revenue. And I think what you said would amount to tax increase. If we are going to increase taxes, we must do a very careful balancing act. Hong Kong is attractive because we have a simple and low tax system. Can I please continue? Sorry, because of time constraint, can you just answer me whether you would make use of the midterm review and add to $20 billion? And you said if you were to increase tax, I have always told you that we could put a tax on stock dividend. Well, I don't have nothing to add actually. It's just that if we want to make the pie bigger, we have to increase taxes. And if we were to do that, we have to be careful in balancing all aspects. No, Chairman, he has not answered my question. And that is, would he follow the midterm forecast for expenditure in 2012-13? Mr. James Tian has asked to speak. Is there any other member who would like to speak but who has not risen or raised his hand? If not, I will draw a line there. And then next, Mr. Lam Tai Fai. Is it my turn? Thank you, Chairman. Secretary, the administration always emphasizes that the philosophy of fiscal management is to cut our clothes according to our cloth and also to be prudent. But as you know, ever since the reunification, every time you have been wrong with the deficit and the estimates. Now, of course, I do not have as much experience as you do in fiscal management, but still I don't understand why you always make your estimates wrong. But it is a big thing, isn't it? Because it has an impact on resource allocation. It would also affect expenditure and the use of our money, so you cannot do a lot of concrete things. My question for you is, Secretary, are you confident that in the next budget, your financial estimate in terms of surplus and deficit, you will get them right? Let us say you will not be excessively wrong. Secondly, there are many public organizations, including CLP Power, MTRCL, and other public service organizations. They are subject to a fair adjustment mechanism, but of course, in the end, the fares would only go up and not down. But if you look at corporations, the fiscal reserve of the administration is so healthy. Now, of course, it will be used to stabilize the Hong Kong dollar, etc. But as you know, the economy is very uncertain and business is very difficult, and SMEs need your support. Can you consider doing this now? And that is the fare or tariff adjustment mechanism can also be triggered. In other words, that the profits tax can be reduced for SMEs so that they could be assisted. First of all, are you confident that you can get the surplus and deficit correct this time around? And secondly, can you reduce profits tax? Secretary. Thank you, Chair. I think I said in detail that the forecast work is not strict science, and we can see that the external environment is subject to a lot of volatilities, and our revenue in terms of stamp duty, tax, and land premium, all that could be affected by fluctuations or volatilities in the external environment. This is not something we can control. It will be very difficult this year. Did you say difficult? I did not hear you. What did you say? I think this year is going to be particularly difficult. So we will be particularly careful in doing tests in different respects. And I will also try my best to generate revenue. Well, every year the revenue can fluctuate, but then our expenditure is always stable. Whether you have a big or small revenue, you have to spend some money. So we will have to be prudent. Generally speaking, we will always spend within our means. And if you look at the years in which I have been financial secretary, I will always spend where money should be spent. This is my principle. And of course, spending will be policy-led. If the policy states that money should be spent, we will not look at the surplus in order or the reserve in order to decide on expenditure. Spending is policy-led. It is not based on the level of our reserves. As to whether we can reduce tax further for SMEs, well, from the slides, you should have seen clearly that 90% of companies do not have to pay tax. Only a small portion had to pay tax. Mr. Dennis Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. Some other members mentioned budgeting. In fact, in Hong Kong, many long-term policies cannot be set in an objective manner because we do not have long-term and in-depth figures. Say, for example, in the U.S., the Congressional Budget Office and also the Bolt-Simpson report, they would do 10-year, 20-year, 30-year budgeting. And those are on 3 levels, a base scenario, optimistic and pessimistic levels. Now, of course, if you are talking about long-term budgeting, it cannot be totally correct or accurate. I can accept it and I understand it. However, an in-depth long-term budget should still be drawn up, because in Hong Kong, if we want to make long-term policies, particularly when we have an aging population and we can expect more expenditure on social welfare and medical services. We need objective data in order to formulate long-term policies. I don't know whether the administration will consider doing what CBO or like what the Bolt-Simpson report has suggested doing, and that is long-term budgeting. Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. If you look at the entire world, if any place can make a 20-year budget, that is only something that seeks to cheat you. If you talk about the Congressional Budgeting Office or the Bolt-Simpson report, as you know, the U.S. is very political, and if they only seek to do budgeting from a financial point of view, the accuracy will always be a controversy. If you look at previous CBO forecasts, in fact, it has not been exactly accurate. In Hong Kong, we do midterm forecasts. Every time in the budget, we have an MRF. It doesn't cover 20 years. It is not so ambitious. We only cover 4 to 5 years. So this is what we do in Hong Kong.
Mr. Kenneth Lau. Thank you, Chair. 2 questions. One, on a microscopic level, I'd like to ask about the fiscal reserves. Just now, in slide 19, you talk about the 533.8 billion unfunded pension liabilities. I'd like the administration to provide us with the assumptions on which the chariots are based, and is it based on the 533.8 billion liability for pension? And what about this relationship with the civil service pension reserve fund in the fiscal reserves? This is the first question. The second question, on a macroscopic level, about profits tax. Has the FS considered that in fact we can introduce a tax rate for SMEs? Now for a standard corporation, they pay 16.5% tax rate. If we introduce a tax rate for SMEs, some companies currently paying 16.5% may benefit from it. For other corporations making profit, they may be caught in a tax net. So if we only have one tax rate, this may not help much. If we have, say, a 10% rate for SMEs, then the government can give an impression to the public that we're concerned about the development of SMEs. FS. Now I'll defer to PS to answer the question on pension. As for profits tax, as mentioned, we have, on average, about 90,000 corporations pay profit tax, about 1 million. So let's say 800,000 corporations do not pay any tax. These are mainly SMEs, I reckon, or that they do not reach the tax-paying threshold. So if we lower the tax rate, will we really be able to help SMEs? I have some doubts, but I can consider your suggestion. I'll defer to PS to talk about the pension. Now for pension for public officers, we conduct a regular review. At present, 120,000 roughly civil servants will get a pension on retirement, and there are currently 100,000 retired civil servants, and we based our estimation on these 220,000 civil servants. And then by 2023, that is the peak period, the liabilities in total would be some 500 billion. And on average, we will pay this pension liability every year under the general revenue account. As for the civil service pension reserve fund, when the general revenue account cannot pay for the pension liabilities, we will make use of this reserve fund to pay the liability. So there is only $200 or so in this pension reserve fund. So that's the existing level, just $200 million. Mr. Wang Ting-kwong. Madam Chair, on fiscal management, the administration attaches importance to spending within their means. We have all along had a simple tax regime, and over the years we have reduced the tax for red wine, etc. We emphasize a narrow tax base and a simple tax regime with low tax rates. So after abolishing the several tax types I mentioned, will there be any positive or negative impact to our revenue? Do we gain anything from it? FS. Recently, as far as Hong Kong's economy is concerned, our goal is to increase job opportunities, and therefore we abolished a number of taxes, including the inheritance tax and the tax for red wines. And after introducing these measures, we found that there has been a positive impact on employment at different levels, including the lower level, and macroscopically, the impact on our total revenue is minimal. So, with minimal impact on our revenue and macroeconomic gains, we find it feasible to give it a try. So, can FS supplement after abolishing these taxes? How much less is the administration collecting as direct tax income? And what about indirect assessment? Will, in the end, the administration suffer from a loss instead of having any gain? FS, any information? I can give you some information. Financially speaking, our revenue is reduced, but economically, we stand to benefit. We have different assumptions, and we have different figures from these assumptions. I can give you these figures after the meeting, Mr. Chen Kam-nam. Madam Chair, I also want to ask a question on the 91,000 corporations paying registered, and 90,000 corporations pay 31%, whereas top 1,400 pay 69% of the profits tax. Now, there are allegations of tax avoidance, etc., but my understanding is that many SMEs are already facing difficulties in their business operations, and they do not even meet the tax-paying threshold. This shows that the administration should deploy more resources to help SMEs. As far as difficulties facing SMEs are concerned, has the administration considered the sources of these difficulties in terms of wage costs or rental costs, they account for a large percentage. So just now I asked a question on the training of manpower, and I wonder if the administration can introduce more measures to help SMEs in this regard. As we are very concerned about our SMEs because over 90% of our corporations locally registered are SMEs, and in the budget this year, because of the possible global economic fluctuations, we introduced in June a series of measures to help SMEs. I think the biggest problem facing SMEs is financing. Therefore, we have a $100 billion guarantee scheme, and so far we have received 4,000 to 5,000 applications involving more than $20 billion in terms of loan approved. I believe that this will help SMEs in tiding over the difficulties, and the ECIC also offers favorable insurance policy terms for exporters in Hong Kong, and for these exporters, they will also be assisted. We also have a number of one-off relief measures, waiver of business registration fees, and the export levy to be reduced by half, etc. I believe that all these measures can directly or indirectly help SMEs tide over the difficulties and continue with their operations. Mr. James Tien. Madam Chair, on slide 14, number 1, I want to point out that there are 770,000 registered corporations, and only 91,000 are paying tax. And I can say that I belong to the my subsidiary companies belong to the 700,000 companies, but my parent company is definitely among the 1,400 top corporations. So this chart doesn't mean anything. Many corporations in Hong Kong aren't doing much business. Well, in fact, it's more than 1,400 corporations. There are more corporations paying profits tax. Now, unfortunately, Lee Cheuk-yen and the Labour Party and other colleagues have left. I want to say that as far as the current level of the fiscal reserves is concerned and the income generated from the exchange fund, I think that more can be done to help the underprivileged group. The Liberal Party has suggested that for people who have been, or for the able-bodied who have been on CSSA for more than 2 years, they should be barred from getting CSSA. It's inappropriate for these able-bodied persons to get CSSA for 6 or 7 years in a row. So I'm asking the administration whether anything will be done to curb the abuse of CSSA. That is, for the able-bodied, after they rely on CSSA for 2 years, they will need to go out and look for jobs. And if they really encounter further difficulties, they can then reapply for CSSA. The other question is on slide 19 and on civil service pension. That is $533 billion. This gives people an impression that the administration is short of money. But the other day, the Hong Kong MA explained that we have a $2,600 billion sitting on our reserve, so that's in the exchange fund. So I'd like to ask the administration, deducting the assets and liabilities from the $2,600 billion, are there any outstanding liabilities? Now, about the 533 billion unfunded pension liabilities, no government would do something like that. Let's say if this payment is made in one go. Well, I'm saying that for the income generated from the exchange fund, the income of $40 or $50 billion should go back to the government to help the underprivileged group and to help SMEs. For example, for SMEs earning $1 million or below, the lower tax rate should be introduced. FS. Now, according to the chart, 90,000 corporations, roughly, are paying profits tax in Hong Kong. So, despite many corporations not paying profits tax, 90% or 90,000 is paying profits tax. Well, we spend our money rationally, and since 1997, our expenditure has increased from $2 billion to $200 billion to $400 billion. As for the abuse of CSSA, I will talk to the Bureau Director, Mr. Zhang, and see what can be done. Will you consider Mr. Tian's suggestion? He hasn't answered the point about civil service pension. Now, any response? As I said just now, this is the lump sum. If we adopt the accrued accounting method, this will be the lump sum. But as I said, that the expenditure every year would be different. Now it's 200 billion, but some time down the road it may be 20 billion, but it may go up to 50 billion. And we will closely monitor this sum. This will be our outstanding liability.
Lastly, it's me. I would follow up on what I asked this morning, and that is the rental increase has gone beyond the affordability of the public and also the SMEs. I think this is borne out by figures. There are many enterprises which are not paying tax. I believe part of the reason is because of the high rental increase. When you answered Mr. Chen Kam-lam, Mr. Secretary, you said that you would know that the biggest pressure of SMEs is financing. But apart from financing, I think rental is also another issue. I hope you will not overlook that in writing out your budget. Well, SMEs can have tax breaks for their rentals, but then the middle income group cannot. We have mentioned this to you many times. Now that you have a tax break for profits tax, if this can be extended to members of the public who pay rentals, then you can lessen their burden in a way. I hope when rentals are continuing on the increase, I think you can consider optimizing the tax break for profits. So this can apply to members of the public who are paying rentals. And then the Community Care Fund is making arrangements for low-income earners and those who live in very undesirable environment to give them some subsidies. For the low-income people, they are waiting to be rehoused in PRH, and they are under a big burden to pay rental in the private market. So, Secretary, you should not forget them either under the CCF or under the budget, so you can give them some financial support to make life easier for them. I hope you can take on board those 2 points when you write the budget. But actually now let me come to my questions. One, the wrong estimation done on revenue. I think that has been mentioned by many members. I know that this is not strict science. Of course, making an estimate is can never be accurate, but then you have done the wrong estimate all these years. And the public may ask the question, does this have to do with the procedures? And maybe you can improve your procedures. Have you got a working group internally, or would you engage a consultant to see how you can make more accurate estimates of your income and expenditure, because in fact the mistakes have been quite huge. And I know that in many countries they do not do estimation on the basis of cash flow. Have you considered the pros and cons of using accrued accounting or cash flow accounting? Your first question. Well, you have made many suggestions. I thank you for those. We will consider your proposals. As to our estimates, we are also very concerned. But this is quite a big difficulty because we are an externally oriented economy which is subject to impact by the external environment. We are aware, and also accounting firms have also made estimates from time to time, and their estimates are not more accurate than ours. So you can see how difficult it is. And your second question, the accrued accounting method. Every year this is listed. I don't know whether the SFST would like to say something. Yes, we do have a table showing accrued accounting. And as for the unfunded pension liabilities, those would be reflected in that table. In terms of controlling income and expenditure, the cash flow accounting is desirable, but the accrued accounting method can give you other information. Okay, Mr. Ronnie Tong would like to speak in the second round, and also Lee Chek-yen. I think I can only give you 1 minute in the second round, sorry. I'm not asking for a follow-up. I'd just like the secretary to give me answers for my 2 questions. Can he give a more focused response? Do you remember my questions? Well, I don't have a very good memory now. Can you repeat your questions? First of all, stamp duty and land premium. Would there be a big impact from these on your budget next year? Secondly, the policy address and the budget are put together for consultation. Will you be seeking meetings with with all the political parties? Thank you. As I said, I hope we will not have more or less income from stamp duty. If the measure is successful, I believe there would not be a lot of impact. It is a main source of income for us. As for land premium, in the past year, we have launched sites for auctioning every quarter on our own initiative, and I believe land premium income will increase. As what you asked, Chairman, this is not within our original budget, because when I did the budget, I did not know that there would not be so many sites for auctioning. Now we have, on our own volition, put out many sites in the market, and so I believe the land premium income will increase. Will there be another chance for members to speak on the budget? If you are that interested, we welcome it. But I think we have enough time to consult members on both the policy address and the budget, which will meet the public's eye in mid-January and end of February, respectively. Members can now give us your oral views, and then we also welcome written submissions. Lee Chek-yen, I'd like to ask whether the new CE has new thinking. He says he would like to make livelihood easier, but do you budget for it? I was saying whether in the midterm review you can estimate for an increase in expenditure. And you can let me know the figure, please, because the midterm forecast is public information, and also whether you would increase the recurrent expenditure by a wide margin to take care of livelihood issues. Secretary, as I said, Chairman, if there will be a hefty increase in recurrent expenditure, we must consider increasing taxes heftily as well. This is going to be controversial in society. We have to look at every aspect in order to strike a balance. In other words, the manifesto is not for real. And Mr. Lee is asking you to consider it, that you should increase recurrent expenditure. Please consider it. I think that's all for the budget consultation today. Next, we have an item on the trust law. Since I have another meeting, because this meeting clashes with the next, I'd like to defer to the Deputy Chairman to chair the meeting from this point on. I'd just like to say that the DAB supports the proposed legislation on trust law reform, and hopefully this will come before LegCo as soon as possible. Thank you. So I'll hand over to the Deputy Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Now let us invite the administration team to come in.
Oh, okay. 政府未嚟。好啦，咁我哋呢個咪要俾翻我先啦。咁我哋而家歡迎。
Okay, we welcome officials. First of all, Mr. Patrick Ho, Deputy Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury. We also have Mr. Arsene Yeo, PAS for FSTB. Since this is a legislative proposal, we have also invited other members to come to join the discussion. Can we have an introduction of the paper, please? Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, members. The purpose is to build a framework for the trust law to more effectively perform its functions so that we can encourage more settlers to use Hong Kong as their place of trust. We hope that the law will also become clearer so that it can take care of modern management of trust. In 2010, that is the last round of consultation, most respondents supported the main direction for reform. So in April this year, we introduced the detailed legislative proposal to FAP, and we have also included the draft provisions in the consultation document for the public, and we have taken reference from other common law jurisdictions. Now we have collective views from the second round of public consultation, and most of the views in general are positive. And there are 13 such proposals in para 8 of the paper. We have already made adjustments in view of the second round of consultation. In modernizing the trust law and also to improve Hong Kong's competitiveness by upgrading our ability to handle trust, let us look at 8C, D, F, G, J, K, L, M. Those are for achieving this effect. I like particularly to talk about L, for example. When we did consultation at the beginning of the year, we did not decide whether there would be the introduction of a provision against forced heirship rule. We did not think of making that suggestion then, but then many views that came back were in support, and after internal deliberation, we agree that in amending the trust law this time around, we would include this proposal. We believe this will be helpful to the industry for promoting Hong Kong as a place to formulate trusts. All these powers given to trustees in para 8 have been introduced as default provisions. In other words, in this law, the powers given to the trustee are actually related to the free choice of settlors. And only when there is an absence of intention to the contrary will these default provisions apply. Even so, we believe we should introduce the benefits of settlors and beneficiaries so as to make sure that the trustees can really exercise their powers. This is in 8A, E, H, and I. I like to say that, for example, under I, we talk about subject to contrary intention in the trust instrument. The beneficiary can go through a court-free process for the appointment and retirement of trustees on beneficiaries' directions. This can be a deterrent to the trustees. Under E, again, unless there are contrary provisions it will be a duty for trustees to review the performance of the agents, nominees, and custodians, and this is a duty of care. And then in H, with regard to professional trustees receiving remuneration, most of the respondents think that there should be statutory control. So there would be a professional trustees exemption clause. We believe these three aspects should be written into the law, and that is, if it is about trustees' own fraud, willful misconduct, or gross negligence, so that there is a breach of trust, the trustees cannot enjoy this exemption.
And
this is the outcome of the consultation, and we've now replaced reckless behavior with gross negligence. Finally, for 8B, this proposal removes inconsistencies in the legislation related to trust laws, and the consideration should be given whether the said law intends more than one trustee to run this trust. I have covered all the 13 recommendations and our proposals. Our next step is to finalize the draft amendment bill to incorporate the legislative proposals so as to introduce the bill into LegCo in the first half of next year. Thank you. Questions from members? Let me read out the names. Dennis Kwok, Ronnie Tong, Sin Chung Kai. Any other members? 5 minutes each. Dennis Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. The Civic Party supports the revamping of the trust laws in Hong Kong as soon as possible, because by comparison we are lagging behind other common law jurisdictions. Now, I've communicated with the administration, I've read the paper. In terms of the exemption clause for professional trustees, we have strong reservations. First of all, I think the threshold is too low. Either you don't draw a line, or if you draw a line at such a low level, we don't want to see the not-so-professional trustees to come to Hong Kong to manage a trust. We don't want to affect the rights of minor investors. I understand that this proposal is more to the liking of the industry, but I'd like the administration to consider the views of the Bars Association in their submission in relation to exemption clause and make some amendments. Yes? Thank you. We have considered Mr. Kwok's view as well as a response from the Bar Association from the public consultation exercise. And we also consulted other bodies, for example, the Law Society as well as the industry. The Bar Association raised some doubts and reservations on the exemption clause, but the Law Society agreed that the proposal is appropriate. Our goal is not to lower the requirement, But as far as legislation is concerned, if the breach arises from his own fraud, the clause would be invalid. In 2009, when we conducted a consultation, the same point was raised, and after 2 rounds of consultation, we found that the intention is that we should incorporate this element in the legislation, and we should widen the scope to cover 2 more scenarios, and that's including, like I said, the 2 scenarios. So our intention is to tighten the standard. This is not on the request of the industry, but they accepted it as well. For outsiders coming in, they are made known clearly that they cannot put down exemption clauses and rely on them in the trust instruments. In terms of stability and certainty and the protection for settlers and beneficiaries, the protection offered will not be in any way lower. I understand Mr. Kwok's viewpoint, but having considered the point by the DOJ internally and the Law Society's views, at present we do not intend to amend this area. Anything to follow up from Dennis Kwok? No. Mr. Ronnie Tong. Well, for the point raised by Mr. Dennis Kwok, in fact, during the last round, the point was raised, and I also offered some views. And in Annex 1, I think that it's quite disappointing. On the right to know of beneficiaries, all along there are shortcomings. Even judges agreed that under the existing regime, the beneficiaries are treated unfairly. And now, according to the response, the administration will look further into this proposal. But so far, what have you come up with? Beneficiaries have limited access to information, and there are a lot of excuses to obstruct the access, and the obstruction comes from trustees. Now, one of the proposals is to establish the power or the rights for beneficiaries to remove trustees. But if the beneficiaries do not have any information at all, it's difficult for them to decide on the removal of trustees. So it's contradictory. You should come back and think about it. Dennis Kwok already said that the Civic Party will support the amendment, but if you can't explain this contradiction, I think you should reconsider it. One question from me, and that is the power to remove trustees. Will you should the decision be reached unanimously, or would majority view suffice? This is a controversial issue. For non-charitable trusts, you again say that you will go back and think about it. In fact, I have raised this point time and again. For non-charitable trusts, it happens in a lot of places, and it's also conducive to organizations in Hong Kong. For example, political parties may need to rely on non-charitable trusts in order to survive, unlike the DAB, which can raise a fund of $20 or $30 million just by having a dinner. So some trusts may not be defined as charitable, but still they are useful, and it's conducive to the development of these organizations. So why aren't you making a decision on it yet? So 2 points on the beneficiary's right to remove trustees and non-charitable trusts. Yes, thank you, Mr. Tong, for the 2 questions. Under the common law system, the trustee has the duty to inform the setting up of a trust and disclose the relevant information to sui juris beneficiaries. But what is meant by that? I have come across some cases. For example, some adult beneficiaries may ask the trustees for some correspondence. For example, the correspondence may be favorable to one beneficiary but not to the other, and this correspondence may show favoritism or concealment of facts, and the disputes can just go on. Yes, we understand that there are disputes arising from these cases. In fact, in the past, the Privy Court also ruled that under such circumstances, the judge would need to balance the interests of all parties on what information should be disclosed. Its consideration should be done on a case-by-case basis. There is no open rule on the disclosure of information. We understand that there are requests on codifying the requirement. We understand that there are disputes, but even if we codify the requirements, there may still be disputes, as the common law is constantly evolving, in particular in this area. We think that is premature to reach a conclusion at this stage. We should rather monitor the situation and forge a consensus. So briefly on other questions. On removal of trustees, all sui juris beneficiaries should reach a common decision. This is the out-of-court procedure, and we have adopted the UK practice. And finally, for non-charitable trusts, this is a big topic, and on this occasion we need to consider the time frame, because for such a big topic in the common law system, it's a rather new and not yet permitted concept. If we introduce this kind of trust in Hong Kong, which is unprecedented in other common law jurisdictions, we need to take a holistic approach in our consideration. So at present, we'd like to be more conservative, because we don't want people to make use of that as tax avoidance vehicles. Like I said, many different organizations, many different people may have different purposes for setting up non-charitable trusts, and these may have far-reaching implications, and the matter should be dealt with outside of this legislative amendment exercise. Mr. Sin Chung Kai, according to this paper, I see the word professional trustees have appeared a number of times, and they are entitled to receive remuneration. After the legislative amendments, there might be more room for trustees to become professional trustees by occupation. So in terms of regulation of professional trustees, should it be step up? I understand that so far there are no statutory requirements, but now they are not subject to regulation by the SFC. So in the future, what are you going to do about it? Will there be a registration system, or will the law be enhanced to ensure that they comply with their fiduciary duty? For example, for Commonwealth countries like UK, New Zealand, Australia, how do we fare? I mean, do we need these requirements? Because for the proposals, a lot of them are about expanding their scope of work, but not the scope of regulation. So when you allow an expansion in the scope of work, will you also enhance regulation? Yes. On Mr. Sin's question, well, we do not expand the scope of work as such, but in terms of managing a trust, there might be delegation or transfer of power or appointment of agents, and we're just adjusting the relevant areas to keep ourselves in line with the up-to-date practices. Now, comparison with other common law jurisdictions, there is no single method. There is no such regulation in New Zealand, but there is a regulation in Australia. If the trust is a unit trust, then it is under the purview of SFC. As for trusts set up in private, not related to sale to public, we do not intend to have any regulation, especially when there are no similar requirements in mainstream jurisdictions like UK.
However, with regard to professional trustees, will you see a need to strengthen the fiduciary duties? DS, can I defer to Mr. Yu? Thank you, Chair. In our proposal, we have special provisions on professional trustees. Say, for example, the duty of care. When this is considered, we have to be mindful of the trustee's knowledge and experience, and also in his capacity as a professional trustee. This trustee should give the impression to the settler that since he has this professional knowledge and experience, he would be able to discharge better his duty of care. In other words, in the eyes of the court, professional trustees should already exercise a higher duty of care. But will there be any statutory requirements? I'm not just talking about understanding of the court. I'm saying, should there be stricter requirement in the law on professional trustees? In other words, while you amend the law, will you also impose stricter requirements on professional trustees? I will take that up in a macro manner. Before we eventually provide the bill, we will look at this point again. I'm saying, I'm not talking about the average trustee, but professional trustees. Perhaps you need to define the term and then state what requirements you have of them, because these people may be promoting themselves, say that they are involved in the trust business. I hope you will consider this when you draft the law. Wai-king. Thank you, Chairman. I don't understand what Mr. Ronnie Tong was saying when he mentioned the fundraising by DAB and how that is related to trust law. But I would propose that the civic party can also try to raise funds so you do not have to envy the DAB. I'd like to ask about trying to get fund to Hong Kong so we can have more trusts set up. Well, on that premise, the DAB supports the law reform so that Hong Kong will be aligned with other places. But I'd like to know what happens when trust companies are set up in Hong Kong. What laws are they already subject to? How much should be the capital? And should there be a deposit placed with the administration? If yes, how much is that deposit? And what is the total capital or asset managed by trusts in Hong Kong now? I'd like to know more about the present situation and how the reform will affect the development of trust business in Hong Kong. DS. Chairman. Well, the asset managed by trust, it was about 2,600 billion at the end of last year. As to the entry requirements, I'd like to defer to Mr. Yeo. Thank you, Chair. Under the trust law, if you want to set up a trustee company, you must have a capital of over $3 million. And also you have to provide $1.5 million in cash. When there is controversy or litigation, this will act as a deposit to take care of possible debts. Mr. Wang Ting-Kwang, any follow-up? No, I'd just like to seek some information. Okay, you have the information, right? I myself have a question. We have not changed the trust law since 1970. This is a hard-to-come-by opportunity for you to reform the law. I understand there is this Joint Committee on Trust Law Reform. I'd like you to tell me whether you have been forward-looking in your exercise. Like, as you know, have you taken reference from the Singapore Trust Law so that you are forward-looking in anticipating the needs of Hong Kong society? Have you taken on board the views of the Joint Committee, or is it that you have decided not to take that on board because you estimated that they will not be supported by LegCo? I hope when you submit the bill, you should not just look at the present, but project into the needs of Hong Kong in the next 10 years or in future. And also, you should be forward-looking, or else Hong Kong can never be an international financial center. So did you take on board the views of the Joint Committee on Trust Law Reform? Thank you, Chairman. I think we are already an international financial center. It's just that we, of course, have to work hard in order to preserve our competitiveness. To be frank, the administration cannot know everything. That is why we have taken on the sector as our partner, our important partner, because they know the operational difficulties and they know what measures their competitors can take in order to face Hong Kong's challenge. And that is why in the last 2 rounds of consultation, we have received a lot of views, especially those from the sector. You asked me whether we have not accepted any proposals by the sector. Well, there are 2 such proposals. One, which has been mentioned, and that is non-charitable trusts. The industry would like to have that category. And if you look at our neighboring countries where there will be a major change, but as I explained, very often the international community has viewed this with a suspicious look, that in fact they are suspected to be for the purpose of money laundering or tax avoidance. So we have to be careful. I told the industry that we would not close the door absolutely, but then we are just not going to do it in this reform. And secondly, investment requirements. Because in the trust law, in Schedule 2, there are these requirements. The industry said that this could be much relaxed. We looked at the situation and we adopted 2 proposals, and that is to reduce the capital threshold so they can have more choices to place investments. However, if we are talking about newly listed companies without a record, we still think that we should be prudent. Therefore, we would like to adopt the principle of prudence. And you are correct in saying that we did not take on board all the proposals of the industry. Well, there's still some time before you table the bill. I hope you will adopt an open mind and also avail yourselves to international and local developments. I hope you will adopt an open mind, and if necessary, you should look at our needs for the next few years. Yes, in the interim, we'll continue to communicate with the industry. Right, members, any other questions? If not, that's all for this item. I'd like to thank Mr. Ho and Mr. Yu for coming. Last but not least, AOB. Anything under AOB? If not, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming.